Good morning. I'm Dan Noone. I'm the CEO of G2 Goldfields. We're listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol GTWO and on the OTCQX as GUYGF. With me today, I have our Vice President of Exploration, Boaz, calling in from Georgetown, Guyana. We are a gold explorer who has made a discovery down in the northern Guyana in Greenstone Belt. It's the Oko deposit. We recently released our initial resource. It is 974,000 ounces of inferred mineralization gold at 9.5 grams per tonne. And also we have 220,000 ounces of gold in indicated at 8.3 grams per tonne. So it's exciting times, and we are looking forward to having a conversation with Merlin today.
Dan, thank you very much. Great introduction. Boaz, nice to meet you. I'm completely new to G2 Goldfields, so I'm really looking forward to learning more about your project over the next short while. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Our pleasure.
Actually, before we kind of get stuck into the detail, could you give me a quick background on where it is in Guyana? Because I've got these kind of vestigial memories that there are a few gold mines in Guyana. I've, Omai, and they're big, and I just don't know where they are relative to Oko. So if you can perhaps, Dan, it'd be a good thing to pull up a regional map or a
most definitely, yeah.
And just by the way, how long have you been working on it, and what's the kind of the discovery process been on this?
Okay, we started drilling in Oko in November of 2019. So our first hole actually discovered the Oko deposit. We did that deal. We closed the deal in October. We had acquired a company called Bartica Investments that had the land position down there. We then did a deal to expand that land, and we've been drilling since. So we started with one rig towards the end of second half of last year. We increased that to 2 rigs, and moving forward, we will be increasing that to 3 in the next couple of weeks. So I've just brought up the image of Guyana here. It is it's in northeastern South America. Where we are is in this northern part of Guyana. Georgetown is over here. And so you have the Venezuelan border, and then we're in the northern part of the greenstones here. Aurora is about 70 kilometres to the northwest of us. That's 6.5 million ounces, and that's mined by Zijin Mining. Toroparu is a deposit that's going into production. GCM Mining from Colombia is started that process of upgrading the road out to the Toroparu for the construction. Omai, which mined 4.5 million ounces historically, is down here in the south on the Essequibo River. And then there's the Puruni deposit, which Troy Resources from Australia was mining. So we're in the centre of this area. So we're the Aramu Oko district here, and we also have the Peters and Jubilee. But our main focus to date has been the Oko deposit right here.
You showed that you had four project areas there. Which were the two that you? What was the start of? What did you pick up first, and where did you expand your land position to?
Okay, so originally we picked up we had the Aramu claims within Bartica Investments, and we then added the Oko claims, so half of that district, and we had the Peters mine and the claims associated with that, and we picked up the Jubilee deposit. So that were the extensions.
When you talk about kind of a deposit, do you mean these are artisanal workings, so that kind of essentially it's pre-discovered for you by the local diggings?
To a degree, we can say that. The Aramu and the Peters mines were historic mines from the early 1900s, because there was a gold rush in the 1870s out in this area of alluvial workings. At the headwaters, they found the Peters and Aramu deposits, which were put in production. They were underground mines, high grade, which mined down to the base of the saprolite, and then they finished. So the Peters mine mined 40,000 ounces at 40 grams, and the Aramu mine mined 6,000 ounces at 14 grams. So they were historic. And then more recently, there has been a lot of artisanal mining, or what we call mid-scale mining in Guyana. So at the Oko area, there's certainly been washing of open pits, excavators, and currently there still are small shafts down there with artisanal miners mining high-grade veins. So there's definitely a mining culture in Guyana, and they are definitely great prospectors. So it's a very symbiotic relationship between us and them.
I noticed in your resource that there was some kind of accommodation or some adjustment for the voids associated with artisanal activity. And do the artisanal miners just also go down to the base of saprolite?
Well, they haven't even got that far yet, but that would stop them. But generally, they're down 30 to 50 meters. Is where they can get to with the technology that they have.
And base of saprolite is how deep?
Varies between 70 to 100.
Okay, wow, that's a deep weathering profile. But one of the first words that jumps out of me on the resource was that it's an underground resource. So what does that mean? Does that mean you put in a decline and you leave a crown pillar of 120 meters or 150 meters? And I've just plucked that figure out just because of the depth of saprolite that you've just given me.
No, basically it would be a decline, but the saprolite's quite solid. It's more like plasticine than it is soil. So no, there is a 10-meter pillar left at the surface, and so basically a decline goes directly in. So that's the way the engineers envision it at the moment, because they're so nicely tight and defined as high-grade structures. They don't really see the logic of digging a pit on top of it like you commonly would in Western Australia. Here, it would appear that the most cost-effective and profitable way of doing it would be a decline and underground mining from day one.
A quick glimpse at your resource table shows that you've got a whole bunch of shears there, sub-parallel shears, presumably, and it's shears 3 and 5 which hold the most of the resource, and that there's some resource in shear 4, but the bulk of the resource lies within shears 3 and 5. And are these? This is just across the Mid-Atlantic Rift. It matches up with West African. So we're talking kind of Birimian age, kind of shear-hosted gold, very similar to the stuff that's being mined in West Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, our model there is a Boasi. It's hosted within the Carbonaceous shales. You've got these veins near geological contacts, extremely continuous and high grade. We haven't quite got it as big as a Boasi yet, but we see that as our model, and it certainly holds up. And so very, very similar. So as a high grade underground mine, veins that vary between 1.5 meters to 8.5. We dilute them out to 1.5 meters in the resource, and it's very similar, very, very similar. So there's nothing new about this. It certainly is West Africa and geology, and we think has the same potential as maybe you saw in Ghana in the early 1990s.
So no pressure, Boaz. You just got to find another 14 million ounces.
That's correct. Yes. I mean, we certainly think that we're in the right geological address to keep adding significant resources. We'd really love for it to be to the tune of 14 million ounces or more, but we'll see about that as we continue exploring the district. But as Dan says, we're basically exploring on the base and margins of the upper the Guiana Shield equivalent of the upper Birimian sequence, those carbonaceous mudstones interbedded with arenaceous sands and silts. And the reason we have these sort of parallel shears across the system is that we've got this unit interstratified with an intermediate volcanic sill units. And it's on those margins between the carb shields and the competent andesites that we get these shear zones being developed. So we've discovered 6 of them, in fact, so far. And the high grade seems to be associated with shears number 3, 4, and 5 out of that.
So it's a real logical contrast between the sediments which flow more plastically and the andesites which are more competent. That's correct, yes. Okay, interesting. And I noticed, I didn't realize that there was an Obuasi link here, but I saw in the resource that there's good metallurgical recoveries, but there's at least a proportion of the Obuasi resource which is refractory. Have you got a kind of a refractory component to the resource here?
No, we haven't encountered anything like that yet. So not to say somewhere in the district there won't be, but certainly at the Oko main zone, it's extremely simple metallurgically. There's a lot of visible gold, and the bulk leach extractable gold tests that we did had 98.3% recoveries in 12 hours. It was quite incredible.
Yeah, just to add a bit to that as well. I mean, in terms of the host rocks and to a degree the structural setting, it's similar to the Obuasi system, but the mineralogy is a little bit different, though. We have significantly less arsenian pyrite in our deposit. And as Dan said, In terms of all the sulfides that we typically see in our drill core, we've got very trace amounts of galena and chalcopyrite, but it's principally a gold plus pyrite system, so it's fairly clean metallurgy. And at least from the initial bottle roll test that we've done, as Dan mentioned, we had very positive results.
And the gold is hosted in the fractures of the pyrite on the and it separates well, it leaches well.
So majority of the gold occurs sort of coarse gold grains within laminated quartz veins that are hosted within the shears on the stratigraphic margins that I was just describing. So Dan mentioned earlier, these veins are typically between 1.5 to as wide as about 8 meters, which is, for instance, an intercept that we had in shear number 5 in OKD 113, where we had a dilation in one of those vein structures. But it's effectively one of these sort of quartz reef hosted systems where we've got the high-grade gold within these sort of very planar bodies and pretty continuous along strike and down dip within the shears.
I noticed that the range on your semi-varigrams for shears was kind of 60 or 70, 80 meters. I was very surprised by that. And I was also struck by the cutoffs, the top cuts you applied. For shears 4 and 5, I mean, there were 70 grams top cut and 60 grams top cut. I mean, these are really, really high top cuts. What gives you the confidence to project 50, 60, 70 meters along the main axis in your resource calculation, and also to have such high top cuts?
Well, that was not particularly our choice. That was Micon, and it was done by the statistics, the plots on the histograms, and the variabilities. So we're quite comfortable with those numbers, and Micon are as well. They basically have visited sites several occasions and seen the core, and so they're confident with the geological model. Statistically, it hangs together, and really there's not that many crazy numbers in our database. Well, we've done fire screen assay since hole 28, so we don't get that really silly 500, 600 grams a ton gold stuff, but we also don't get zero when we get visible gold in the core. So it plots amazingly well and consistently. And also with when we sat down with Micon in October and said, okay, how do we drill this off to get to initial resource? They said, well, you've got to fill all these gaps in and drill here. And we said, okay, here's the plan, and we should hit these veins here in these spots. And it was amazingly consistent within 1 to 5 meters normally of hitting the shears where we said they'd be. So there's a confidence level geologically that we have the continuity, and statistically the plots show that that's where the top cut should be. So and I think as you see, like in shears 3 and 4, where we get indicated, we have that. It's about density of drilling to get to that. And that's because we started on shear 3, and then we drilled the shear through to shear 4. And then later on at about hole 50, we drilled through to shear 5. So when you see in shears 3 and 4 that we end up with average of 8.5 grams a ton, that's actually higher than the inferred that we get. So basically, as we fill in the drilling, it really does show up the consistency of the veining, but also the consistency of the grade. So we're pretty comfortable that we've been predictive, we've tested it, and it's hangs in at those grades. So we're very comfortable with that. And as we go drill forward between now and the end of the year, we intend to infill the inferred to indicated, and we think the grades will hang up, and certainly the consistency of the veining will be there as well. But that's something you be predictive, you test it. If it works, then it's fair enough.
You run with it. I was very glad to see that you were using a 4 gram cutoff as your lower grade limit, because the note in the resource said that 2 grams is economic, but you've been conservative as using 4 grams. And I was like, phew, that's.
I think because you want to, in the next phase, convert the inferred to indicated, you've got to be a bit harder on yourself at the start. So we had minimum widths of 1.5 meters. So if the vein was less than that, we diluted it out, and then we took the cutoff to 4 grams, because the deposit hangs together at 4 grams. The body's, you don't start seeing holes at all. So, we're trying to create a resource that's going to make a lot of money. as opposed to just a big one, right? So,
but the main blocks you're using are 10 by 10 by 3, and I saw that and I thought, okay, they're using 3, which is a kind of a minimal mining width. Is that what you've got in mind as a minimum mining width of 3 meters?
No, we've got a minimum mining width of 1.5 meters, and that's basically because in Northern Ontario, 5 feet's always been the minimum mining width. So people understand that. So it's like, if that's what's considered minimum mining width, we'll go with it.
But you're not going to have a kind of a modern automated mine, and you know, a mechanized mine.
Yeah.
A mechanized mine is it not now 3 meters? Is it less than that?
They have jumbos down to 1.4 meters now. So if you can mechanize down to 1.5 meters. The question being, do you want it, or do you want to go with air legs and go fully electric underground rather than having diesel powered motors? These are questions, I suppose, as we run through a PEA that you'd answer. But I mean, certainly high grade vein mining, if you go with air legs as opposed to jumbos, you certainly get rid of a lot of ventilation issues because you're all electric underground. So, you know, they're trade-offs, which we'll look at. But that'll come with the engineers and sitting down and figuring out what works best. The
other thing I didn't quite understand was the child blocks. You had these in your model. You had child blocks of 2 by 2 by half a meter. What role did they play?
Yeah, well, basically there are some areas within our resource. I mean, the widths of these veins, they're not consistent. They're quite variable from area to area, right? So where we get to domains where the vein narrows out to 1.5 meters or sometimes a bit less than that, what Micon has done is basically created those child blocks effectively to reduce the dilution that we're getting from the bigger block size. So it's really to control that aspect of the tonnage estimation within the resource.
Okay, so to slim down the big blocks, which are 3 meters across, when the mining width is going to be 1.5 meters, you can put child blocks. Correct. You can put kind of them in the panels to just say that that's waste and this is ore.
That's correct. Yes, because you want to control the dilution, you know, at the earliest phase of the resource. So that's been the main sort of objective to do that.
There's a hell of a progress. You've gone from discovery in effectively 2 years through a pandemic, from first drill hole, when was it, late 2019, to maiden resource in early 2022. I mean, that's great progress. Was it difficult in the pandemic? Obviously, yes, but you know, how did you manage it?
I think that's an answer for Boaz, because I didn't get to go down there during the pandemic, and he ran the whole operation. So I'll toss that one to you, Boaz.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, in effect, we and this is credit to Ms. Violet Smith and her local team out in the country office that have given us a tremendous amount of support. We've effectively had to be a bit more disciplined and screen as much of the workers, for instance, before they head into site. So we did a bunch of rapid antigen tests and even a few PCR tests back in the early days of COVID when we didn't fully understand it. And we just tightened up on our protocols at camp as well. So we sort of tightened up on workers being able to go in and out and reduce the frequency of transport and things like that. And that has had a tremendously positive impact in terms of helping to control a situation where we had potential outbreaks at our camp. So we did have a few instances where we had positive cases. And, you know, we sort of went to isolation and managed that effectively to prevent a full spread across the camp. So that's really what has helped us to survive.
And have you got prep labs and full analytical labs in Guyana, or do you have to send abroad for the assays?
Yeah, we use a laboratory, MSc Labs. We're a certified lab that's based just out to the east of Georgetown. And we basically transport all the core and Bedford trucks out of sight along the road back into Georgetown, and we dispatch it to the lab, and that's how that gets done.
And MSA is a Canadian lab based in Vancouver, so they set up a shop down there about 3 years ago. So and they do all our assaying down there. So it's at times during the pandemic they had to ship it to Vancouver because they had a lack of supplies. But now they're definitely assaying everything in country.
Great, and it must have quite good capacity there. I mean, it's probably get better turnarounds there than you would do in Vancouver.
Most definitely. Yeah, now they've once we get the rocks to the lab now, it's 10 days. So that's amazing. It's very good.
That's super. In your presentation, you had some nice plan views of the kind of, you had some aerial photographs with the traces of the deposits. Could you pull some of those up, please?
Okay, so there's an image of the area. So
that's the one.
Yeah, so from Aramu mine in the northwest down to the Oko main zone is 17.5 kilometres. And so this red circle here is what contains the Oko main zone to date. Then we have the Oko northwest. Now these squares are 3 kilometres by 3 kilometres. It's quite large scale. We've drilled 11 holes into the Oko northwest area in this area in the centre here. You can see all the artisanal workings scattered through the areas. This is Tracy. It's a bit earlier stage. That's still a geochemical soil anomaly. The Aramu mine area is 4 kilometres long. The historic Aramu mine I mentioned before was here. And we have the sedimentary package, which hosts a high grade running out along here. To the west, we're drilling currently at the Shepherd Vein. We also have recently picked up this area on the northwest of the Bartica batholith, which has a whole series of artisanal workings along that 5Ks. And then closer to home, Oko East, we have artisanal workings again with grab samples up to an ounce. And between our Oko main and our boundary to the south with Reunion, who've made a discovery, we also have what we call the Guyanese zone. And I'll quickly pop to that because here's a photo of the area. This is the Oko main zone here. Block 4 of Reunion is down here. This Guyanese area is a series of old open pits full of water with tailings everywhere. And so we not much outcrop. But we're doing some geophysics down here at the moment. And we think our main carbonaceous shale units will run around to this side of the Guyanese area. But also the Block 4 equivalent would be over on this side of what is an intrusive body which has been emplaced here. So it's still early days on the Guyanese block. We've got a lot of hope there that we'll find another Oko main zone or Block 4 within that 1.2 kilometre of strike length.
Forgive my ignorance, but what's the Reunion Block 4 story?
Okay, so basically after we made the discovery here, Reunion already had this land down here in joint venture with Brian Stevens, and they had old pits and old workings down here. So they came on, they did some geophysics in a joint venture with Barrick and some soils, and they went out and they made their discovery at about probably a year after our initial discovery at the Oko main zone. And they've had some pretty good hits. So they're slightly behind us as far as getting towards a resource, but they're definitely drilling away down there and they're doing quite well.
And their target is both in the carbonaceous shales, but also you said into a kind of in a more competent rock off to the side. Is that correct? Is that a similar target you've got at Guyanese?
Exactly. So basically there's an intrusive which has popped in. Our Guyanese zone comes down north-south, has an inflection around and comes down here, and that's our carb shales. And intrusion has been popped into that inflection, and their mineralization is on the western margin of that intrusion in sandstones. So it's actually slightly different part of the sequence. And so it's a slightly more disseminated style of mineralization than what we're seeing at the Oko main zone.
Okay, and why did you start drilling at the Oko main zone? Why didn't you put in the first holes into Aramu, for example, which was a kind of a historic mine?
Okay, so we just closed the deal with Michael Vieira on the claims over here at Oko. We had a $200,000 payment due in December. So we went straight to Oko and we drilled under a shaft.
Okay.
Boaz laughs at me, but that was our thinking at the time.
I mean, it's exploration 101, isn't it? You do where you've got to go to get them to make the investment, and you drill under or around an existing pit, and you build your picture up around it.
Exactly. And then we had Boaz out there early on. He joined us just after that first hole. And there wasn't a lot of geology at surface to see, but there was enough structurally that he could figure it out. And once we started drilling, you get that data. Right? The drilling gives you the data of what the mineralization looks like. So that was important, but you do have to start somewhere. You got to start putting holes in but being very careful to log and figure out what the geometry of your system is. And
Boaz, now have you got an eye on the geology? Can you see when you're into the good stuff when you're drilling at Oko main zone? Can you say, oh, this is very interesting? What does it look like when you're into the good stuff apart from the visible gold?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically the first thing you start to notice is the alteration patterns on sort of the distal areas from the main high-grade core of the ore body. And we typically start to get an earlier phase of silica sericite alteration, particularly within the siltstones and sandstone units that are adjacent to the mudstone. So as you come out of the andesite and into the sediment package, you get these altered silts and sands, and then eventually you hit a pretty sharp carbonaceous mudstone boundary, and that alteration generally drops off, but sometimes it's still there as a sort of a weakly banded form, following specific bedding contacts. But when you get into the carb shales, you start to get a distinct, very ductile style of deformation where you have very prominent shear cleavages developing. And sometimes you can see rootless folds or sort of S&C fabrics as well in the core. And then eventually you get beyond the shear zones, which also have these sort of dismembered, narrow, sort of centimeter scale quartz, mainly quartz calcite plus pyrite veinlets, which carry some low-grade mineralization. By low-grade, I mean between 1 to 3 grams. And eventually you reach to sort of the core of the shear where you get just sort of shear failure, and you have the emplacement of these laminated quartz vein structures, and that's typically where we have the high-grade gold being hosted. So much of the coarse gold that we see within the system are pretty much at or adjacent to these very distinctive carbonaceous laminations within the quartz veins, and they're fairly frequent where they're well preserved within the veins. The laminations, that is, they occur at a frequency of between 10 to 25 centimeters along the vein for the entire widths of the veins, which are between 1.5 to about 8 meters wide. So, and then you pretty much see the reverse as you go down the other side of the core and get either deeper into the sediment package or back into an adjacent intermediate volcanic unit.
And have you found these kind of carbonaceous laminations in this kind of ultra strained environment without gold?
In some areas, yes, because we, depending on where we are within the shears, and we believe that there are some very distinct domains where you've got subtle flexures and these sort of irregular pockets that you get dilations or vein dilations within the shears. But then they're the opposite to that, where we get into some very tight domains within the shears, and the veins are not as true going, right? So we'd, for instance, see the shearing, but we just get a very narrow vein intersection to the tune of about 30 to 50 centimeters. But that typically, it wouldn't give us a very hot assay, right? So where we're within sort of northeast plunging zones, where we get very good continuity of our high grade, is where we see these very prominent and continuous dilations within the quartz vein structures themselves.
Classic reduced pressure environment within a transpressional system. So you'll get zones of compression where there's no fluid flow, no ability for the gold to be deposited, and then the zones where conditions are more favorable for deposition.
That's absolutely right, yes.
And I saw on that slide that you've put in 11 holes into Oko Northwest, and your assays are pending. But visually, are you seeing the same style of mineralization?
Yes, similar. So we've actually got a mineralization and straining within those rocks being manifested slightly differently, but in the adjacent units to the carbonaceous mudstone. So, for instance, in a siltstone unit there, we have a pervasive, again, a silica sericite alteration. And we've got these very fairly frequent but narrow, like centimeter scale sheeted veins within the hanging wall to the carbonaceous mudstone units, which then have classic shear failure in the laminated veins being developed as well. So what we've observed there so far is we've got the potential for sort of broader zones of mineralization hosted both within the adjacent sandstone units as well as where we've got the veining within the sheared mudstones.
So in a sense, you're comfortable that the fertility of this of that 17-kilometer corridor is you can project it as far as Oko Northwest. You've got that one area that how was it TDM or something between that and Aramu, which you've done less work on. And was it my imagination, or was there a kind of a corridor of mineralization and potentially kind of oblique structures within that, or is that overinterpreting?
I think if you can see my screen now, you can see we're basically in a big regional fold which comes all the way from Aramu and closes around Oko and then heads back out to the west here. So we've probably a series of drag folds along here which generates the environment where we see the gold deposition. Then further to the east, obviously, it's around that margin of the Bartica batholith, which is controlling that mineralization. And of course, we need those deep basin margin structures to feed the fluids up around those edges. So it's we obviously there'll be variability in the amount of gold, but certainly we see high grade at Aramu. We see up to an ounce in trenches at Tracy. We've had samples up to 14 grams at Oko Northwest. So there's certainly the whole system has distinct high grade veins within it, but we see over here at Oko Northwest where we do get that more lower grade disseminated mineralization as well. So still early days, but we think because we're in this pinch point between these three batholiths, that there's been a lot of deformation, a lot of fluid flow, and that's why we like to be in this area in general.
Great. Before you leave that slide, can I just ask, where's your drilling going this year?
Okay, so it'll be most of the drilling will be at the Oko main zone, where we plan to drill down to a depth of 700 to 800 meters down plunge, and so to extend that into an inferred category, but also infill the inferred that we have to indicated, and then we'll be more selective and opportunistic in these other target areas. We've actually split the team in two so that we have two geologists dedicated to creating drill targets outside the Oko main zone. And as we bring these target areas up to drilling, we'll then drill there as well. And that would probably be maybe 10 to 20% of the planned drilling between now and Christmas.
Okay, great. And you mentioned that somewhere in the resource statement, you talk about shears 4 and 5 being open to the north. Is that kind of a down plunge extension? Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, I think if you look at this image here, these are the shapes from the Micron model. So you see basically the plunge is to the northeast. It's and that plunge is the F3 axial plane of the F3 faults. So it's plunging at 40 degrees to the northeast. And our deepest holes in shear 3 is 14 meters at 8 grams. In shear 5, our deepest holes are 8.3 at 14.2 and 4.2 at 37. So we've projected that those plunges, or that mineralization down plunge, that hole 4.2 at 37 was an 86 meter step out down plunge to proof of concept, and it worked. So we're pretty comfortable with that is the direction of the mineralization. And so we're going to basically step down here, drilling at a distance of probably 75 meters spacing to get inferred, as well as infilling higher up to get to indicated in what we already have. So that's the main goal between now and Christmas, and put out another resource hopefully by the end of the year.
And that S5 shape that narrows at its base, is that narrow due to lack of drilling? Yes,
correct. It's very they don't give us anything unless we've drilled it. So that's fair enough. But that shape should continue down on either side. It should fatten out. As we see here, the most on the edge here, we have 11.3 meters at 9.2. So that grade and thickness is still continuing out to the west. So we think the shape should hang together all the way down. We don't see any reason why the geology changes. We are on that north-south limb of that regional fold, which is also an F3 fold, which has that same plunge of 40 degrees to 45. So and the mineralization has come up that plane. So unless we don't see it stopping. I mean, at Aurora, we drilled down 2.2 kilometers. And Aurora is about 70 kilometers to the north of us in the same basin. So, we don't know when the mineralization is going to stop, but our goal is between now and the end of the year to drill it down to 700 to 800 meters.
You were involved with Aurora?
That's correct. So we were there with Guiana Goldfields at Aurora. So that was Patrick Sheridan, our executive chairman, was the founder of Guiana Goldfields in '96. So that first hole was discovery holes for 2004. We took that to feasibility and built it in 2016. Yeah, and it was a great discovery. And Zijin now has it, and they're taking it underground. So it's definitely a great deposit. Slightly different in the sense that it's more like the body itself forms almost a pipe shape, about 180 meters by 120, but it does have folding control within it. And Boaz can talk to that more because Boaz worked with us out there as well. And he's the guy who unraveled the mysteries of that. And so basically we understand what the geology is out there, and it's the same basin that we're in, slightly different package in the sequence, but certainly in the same basin.
Boaz, did you cut your teeth on Aurora?
Yeah, sure. So, we've basically got the Rory's Knoll deposit, which has upwards of 70% of the total resource ounce inventory. And then we've got all of these other smaller satellite deposits, including East Walcott, Matkiss, North Alec-Hill, etc. And effectively what you've got is within what's called the Golden Square Mile, sort of this K.5 by K.5 square is a deposit scale fold closure, right? Which has a very steeply dipping northwest trending axial plane structure that's penetrative across all of the deposits, inclusive of Rory's Knoll. And that fold is plunging about 72 degrees to about 325 degree plunge direction. And that's subparallel to the plunge of the Rory's Knoll pipe. So across the deposits, if you go from the southwestern side, Alec-Hill through to North Alec-Hill, coming all the way back around the fold closure to Rory's Knoll, you'll see that pretty much all of the mineralization is either hosted within silicified and brecciated zones that's parallel to the plunge of that fold hinge, or along these sort of narrow segmented discontinuous veins that are parallel to the axial planar structure. So in a nutshell, that's what it looks like. And Rory's Knoll on that deposit scale was basically on a syncline that's adjacent to a series of anticlinal and synclinal closures, which hosted the East Walcott deposit just off to the west of that. So
you clearly worked there, but how useful has your understanding of Aurora been for your interpretation and your kind of exploration of Oko?
It's taught us that the structural setting of these greenstone-hosted lode gold deposits can be quite variable, and you've really got to pay attention to the fundamental strain fabrics and the state of strain within the rocks when you're out exploring and trying to understand these systems, particularly after the discovery has been made. I mean, at the Oko main zone, we've got, genuine shear structures where we definitely get a bit of strike and lateral continuity on our deposits. But what the Aurora system has really taught us is that you can get mineralization sometimes within the same sort of district that manifests quite differently depending on what structural regime you're sitting in. So it's really important to pay attention to that and put all of the other exploration work within that context.
So no falling asleep at the when you're driving the geological bus.
Well, you can't afford to.
Yeah.
It's really important to remain disciplined in that respect. We truly believe that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Boaz. That's really, really helpful insight. Dan, what haven't we covered that you'd like to emphasize? Because I feel as if I've learned a lot more about the style of mineralization and where you're going with it over the next 8-9 months. Perhaps I've missed something. Tell us about your kind of longer term plans. Are you going to drive another discovery into production? What are your aims and what have I missed?
No, I would say our goal between now and Christmas is basically just to make it bigger and take it down to twice the depth, but also hopefully find another Oko main zone within those other seven targets. We came here looking for tier 1 assets because we think you can find them in Guyana, and that still is the goal. It's not to rest on our laurels at the Oko main zone. Sure, we want to make it bigger and keep expanding it, but we also want to make another discovery within that district, because if we make another discovery there, you already have Reunion to the south of us. It becomes a camp, and it becomes something that when you go to sell it, it becomes more valuable. So our goal is not to build another one. We did that. It's a long 12-year process. We're a bit too old for that this time. But we think also in Guyana, with the oil discovery and the advancing of Guyana as rapidly, as we see now in the infrastructure builds. There's a lot of companies who have come into Guyana and are looking to become miners there, from all the majors through to mid-tiers. So as far as being able to sell the assets or sell the company to another producing company, that's our goal. Our goal is not to build this ourselves. Our goal is to basically find a partner whose shares we like or whose just money we like, and sell it on at some stage before we drill it out to a 5 million ounce deposit. But that is not our goal here. Our goal is to show the size potential and find a partner who this project will fit into their requirements of their production requirements moving forward. And so we're constantly aware of all the companies around us, and certainly a lot of interest from corporates. Obviously not between now and Christmas. Between now and Christmas, we plan to basically take it down to double the depth. But in the long term, we would be looking to transact and reward our shareholders.
I know how painful it is to build a mine, especially in this environment. So I completely understand the push to keep exploring. I think it's the sensible thing to do. You mentioned that maybe 10 to 20% of your exploration budget this year is going to go on outside of the Oko zone. Have you put that ranking together? You quite like the ground to the south of the Guyanese zone. You quite like are you going to announce that? Is that just going to be a kind of a gradual process? You're going to hit things off? Have you got a ranking system? How are you going to allocate that capital and meterage?
Well, like I say, we really just split the team up into the two geos designated for that. And like I say, we'll be opportunistic. Now, obviously, Guinea, because of its location, is a high priority target. The lack of outcrop there makes it a slightly difficult target. But the geophysics we're conducting currently will generate drill targets. And so we'll drill those geophysical targets. At Oko Northwest, that'll be dependent on how those results come back. It's a big area out there, right? So we still got a lot of mapping and geophysics to do. At Aramu, once again, that comes down to along that 4-kilometre trend where we see these dilations or folding along that trend. So we'll drill holes, and then it's an iterative process. We learn more every time we drill holes because we get some decent geology to look at. So, no, it's hard to really say. Certainly Oko Northeast, where that gold rush happened in the early 2000s, where supposedly 40,000 ounces was recovered, that is a hot spot. And that's come out of the Oko Mountains. They're like Australian mountains, very small, but they're laterite capped. So we're just starting to get in there and then find out what is the source of all that gold. And so that should be a deeper volcanic part of the sequence. So we may see a different style of mineralization out there. So, but obviously there's something shedding a lot of gold into those creeks. So we're at different phases in all those areas. But like I say, we'll be opportunistic, and it is an iterative process.
Right. And is it difficult to go and drill a new area? It looks heavily forested, but are there road access? Was it deep rivers? Choosing a new area, is it? How much of is control is the logistics on a new area?
It's not that bad, tell you the truth. Like there's a road all the way up to Aramu, which is a government maintained road. Out to the northeast, there's lots of old logging roads. We generally drag the drill rigs out there behind a D6 bulldozer. We have excavators, so the trails are generally good enough to get our machines out there. Obviously, some areas simpler than others. So along that trend out to Aramu, that's a golden road. That's no problem, right? But out to the northeast, there'll be old logging roads and may need a bit of a repair, but we have our own D6 bulldozer.
I should add here that we do our very best to keep our environmental footprint as small as possible. So where there is the opportunity to use old roads and trails, we definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Good. Well, congratulations on a great discovery. I know discovery is a process, but let's call it a 3-year discovery process so far. I love a bit of high grade. I mean, what's not to like?
Exactly.
Grade and scale.
Yeah, well, definitely. We've got the grade, and I think we're starting to show that we have the scale already. But I think as we take it down to 700-800 meters, we'll see some, a real scale on this, which becomes attractive once again, I say, to producers. So that's our goal between now and the end of the year.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing the updates. Thank you very much.
All right. Great to meet you, Mel.
Welcome.